The Denver Broncos are not going to have Josey Jewell back into the fold at inside linebacker in 2024. How does this change the overall outlook of the room? We'll break it all down and much more here on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody out there in Broncos Country, all the everydayers out there, wherever you're at. Thanks so much for making us your first listen of the day. Every single day, you can get this podcast for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So do us a favor, if you haven't done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe or that follow button down below so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team every single day, all year long, because for the true fan, there is never an off season. I'm Cody Roark. I cover the Broncos for Mile High Sports as a reporter, joined alongside by Sayre Bedinger. He's the site expert over there, predominantlyorange.com. Sayre, NFL free agency. The frenzy continues. Now, while the Broncos haven't gone out and made a ton of big splash moves, they've made some small moves, and some other teams have capitalized by making some big moves, getting some former Broncos now into the mix. Josey Jewell reuniting with Ejiro Evero with the Carolina Panthers, leaving the Broncos and now leaving a lot of questions at inside linebacker. First off, let's talk about how this move impacts the Broncos. What are the Broncos losing here in Josey Jewell this upcoming season defensively?
Most importantly, Cody, they're losing a Hawkeye off the roster. I mean, how dare they get rid of and let the Iowa Hawkeye linebacker legend, the outlaw Josey Jewell leave? No, I mean, seriously, like I obviously Josey has a soft spot in my heart. Cody playing at Iowa, being a 4-year starter there, somebody that I was giddy that the Broncos drafted back in 2018. So the Broncos are losing one of their longest tenured players. They're using somebody that was a second contract player, and they're losing, quite frankly, a guy who improved just about every single year with the team, and a really key piece. I saw some rumors on Twitter, Cody, that Alex Singleton was campaigning for Josey to stick around in Denver, and I'm sure that was true because we know those guys work really well together. We kind of called them the Bash brothers there at the linebacker position, and they worked really well together, communicated well, rarely out of position. I think what the Broncos are losing is more so than just well, you got to replace a linebacker now. It's like, no, you got to replace a guy that's capable of making the calls, wearing the green dot. He's capable of doing everything that is asked of him, and he's proven that. And I think it's a great thing for him to go get that money in Carolina. I think, $22.75 million on a 3-year deal with $10 million guaranteed. So it's a great deal for the Panthers. It's a great deal for Josey. And you and I had even speculated when there was trade rumors about Josey that maybe Ejiro would want him in Carolina as somebody to kind of communicate the defense, to speak the language for everybody. A lot of new faces on that Carolina defense this offseason. Now he's doing exactly that. Josey is going to be that guy. So I like the move for Carolina, Cody. And like you said, we'll talk about the impact that this makes on the Broncos roster here in a bit, but I think it's a bigger loss on paper than people may realize.
And you're losing a glue guy inside the locker room as well. And look, I get it. Sean Payton has ripped off that Band-Aid. He did it with Justin Simmons. Justin Simmons, the ultimate glue guy in the locker room. I mean, when you talk about players at almost every level of Denver's defense that are important, like Justin Simmons was that guy, Josey Jewell was that guy, and now it's like, all right, how do you maybe build on from that? Look, Alex Singleton's led the team in tackles. That, there's going to be the ripple effects that we talk about here in a little bit, but for Josey, this is a situation I think is going to be good for him at this point of his career, going to where, look, I had a chance to speak with Josey last season and even the year before when Ejiro Evero was the D coordinator. And I talked to him in 2022 when the Broncos defense was playing really well under Evero. And he had told me, he said, this is the most fun I've ever had playing in a defensive scheme. Like, this scheme, I could play in this my entire career. Like, that's where he has this level of confidence. And I think that's where Ejiro is going to maximize him even further in Carolina. And look, Carolina's undergoing a whole bunch of changes themselves. But I think for Josey, he wants to go where he knows he can be put in a position from a defensive standpoint where he can thrive. And I think he still maintained that level of play here this past season with the Broncos under Vance Joseph when they kind of changed from going to Fangio's old defense to running Fangio looks, but running Vance's defense this past season. You saw Josey get a little bit more comfortable. You saw everybody get a little bit more comfortable for the Broncos defense when that change was made. But I agree with you here. I do think at some point here in 2024, it is going to pop up that, hey, man, the Broncos, man, they're really missing Josey Jewell. I think there's going to be a stretch of games where you do experience that. And some of that is going to factor into maybe Denver's overall depth at the position as we're recording this episode of the show. Right now, it definitely looks a little bare bones. And obviously, I think there will be some more meat added to the bone at some point to this position. But moving on from Josey, a leader, a guy who has every trait of a defensive captain, and a guy who's very instinctual, knows your defense really well, that's going to be a big loss. And on top of that, look, I think where Denver thrived with Josey, he was a great blitzer. He was great against the run. Now, I think some of the issues we saw at linebacker in terms of tackling, and obviously Denver's defense giving up big yards, I think a lot of that starts at the point of attack in the trenches, which George Paton really kind of highlighted at the NFL Scouting Combine. When your D-line isn't able to generate maybe those double teams, and you're allowed, like the offensive line is double teaming down on a D tackle or a DN, and they're freely moving up to the second level to get hands on the linebacker, and it's easy and they do it. That's not necessarily on the linebacker's fault there. So I think that's a dynamic that we'll have to see. Does this make the Broncos better at the position? That's a question I want to ask you here, though, Sayre. Do you think that the departure of Josey is going to make Denver's defense better in the long run?
Yeah, is it addition by subtraction? Is it change just for the sake of change? I kind of find it interesting, Cody, that Mark Schlereth has really been a former Bronco great. Mark Schlereth, Super Bowl champion, 2-time Super Bowl champion. Mark Schlereth, he's really gotten. I know he's always been vocal. He's never been shy about sharing his thoughts, but I think his opinions on all these roster moves very, very interesting. He's basically saying, like, look, these guys, they may have accomplished things individually, but like they haven't won jack squat in Denver. And I think that's a fascinating point of view. And it's like, for fans, we struggle with this. It's like, well, Josey individually, he did show some really good stuff individually, but on the Schlereth side of things, it's like these guys didn't do jack squat, overhaul the roster. Who cares? There's a lot of change on the defensive side of the ball from the Broncos. And look, to be honest, like this was one of the worst defenses in the league one of the worst in Broncos history for the first 6 weeks last season. And that wasn't all on Josey Jewell, but you start to add up all these different players like Josey leaving, Justin Simmons leaving. You have obviously change at cornerback with Fabian Moreau hitting free agency. You have Jonathan Harris. He was a starter last year. He's probably not coming back. Mike Purcell, he's a free agent. We don't think or know if he's coming back. So there's so much change from last year. And like on an individual case-by-case basis, like you see Broncos fans getting upset about Simmons. You get a little upset about Josey Jewell. And I kind of wonder, like, am I starting to agree with Mark Schlereth here and saying like, all right, as much as you love these guys, out with the old, like they didn't win anything in Denver and it's not all their fault. Obviously, that's a very like, that's kind of like a shock jock way of looking at it, isn't it? But at the same time, it's like maybe some change could be good for this Broncos roster, even as good as these players are individually.
We'll see how it all pans out after, the fact. We'll see where the Broncos are at from a linebacker standpoint here in 2024. After the first 5 or 6 games of the season, it'll be easy for us to kind of come back and reevaluate this decision. Is it a good one for the Broncos? Is it a bad one? How are you feeling, Broncos country, about Josey Jewell's departure? Let us know if you're watching or listening to Locked On Broncos, wherever you get your podcast or on YouTube here. One thing we are going to dive deep into now with Josey being gone, who starts next to Alex Singleton at inside linebacker? That's the question we're throwing out here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024 validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer.
With Josey Jewell off to the Carolina Panthers, who's going to be starting next to Alex Singleton at the off-ball linebacker position in Vance Joseph's defense here in the 2024 season? Cody and I are going to discuss that topic with guys that are on the Broncos roster right now, and eventually we're going to talk about some guys who aren't currently on the Broncos roster, some players that are available that may be of interest. And want to say thank you to every single one of you for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, free and available anywhere that you listen to podcasts. As well as Cody, we've seen a lot of new viewers on YouTube. So if you're not on the YouTube already, man, come and join the party over there. Subscribe on YouTube and join in the discussion with other Broncos fans. We appreciate every single one of you so much for rocking with us this offseason. A lot of news for the Denver Broncos here. A lot of change on the roster. That means a lot of Locked On Broncos. So Cody, let's talk about this because Alex Singleton, he got the new deal last offseason, kind of become a surprise. He was one of those players where we talk about, man, go budget friendly in free agency and kind of just see what sticks. He's a prime example of that. The Broncos signed him to a 1-year deal, cheaper than most day 3 draft picks. He ends up getting a 3-year contract after playing very well in his first year in Denver. So now we kind of look at what's going to happen next to him, right? I mean, he's entrenched as a starter. He's under contract for the next 2 seasons. Without Josey Jewell, I mean, there's not really a clear option on the roster. I mean, there's 2 options. There's only 2 options on the roster, but there's not really a clear, yes, this is the direction we're going. What are your thoughts here? Let's start with Jonas Griffith, who re-signed a 1-year deal. What's your thoughts on Jonas Griffith potentially being penciled in as that other starter?
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity for him to do that. And really, I think another thing we probably should touch on here, we didn't really get a chance to highlight. Obviously, we talked about it last segment that Josey was the green dot, the guy who gets the communication, the signals. And the Broncos lost Justin Simmons, who's also capable of that. Alex Singleton has experience previously with Philadelphia doing the same thing. More than likely, he's going to get the green dot. Usually, you kind of, I think, designate that to your Mike linebacker. But I think this is now Alex's role to kind of take on. I think he's going to stay at the will position. So that means Jonas Griffith, as you had just brought up, a guy that you and I have seen, right? George Paton initially traded for him with the San Francisco 49ers in the NFL preseason or at the end of the preseason because Denver needed help on special teams. They needed depth there. Little did we know that Jonas Griffith is probably one of the most freakishly athletic looking dudes, has the best body type on the team, literally looks like he's chiseled out of stone and has got some traits to him that I think, like, okay, what can this guy do? Not only did he add value on special teams, but for the final 4 games of Vic Fangio's tenure with the Denver Broncos, he had 40 tackles in 40 games, Sayre. And we started to say, like, okay, Denver's got a guy here. And from that point forward, we've seen just kind of like, okay, Josey, Alex in the next offseason, and then obviously now Jonas, they were going to compete. One of those guys were going to compete for the starting job. It was really between Jonas and I think Alex Singleton. And initially, I think people forget, it was Josey and Jonas who got the start initially for the Broncos in Nathaniel Hackett's first season as a head coach, Ajiro Evra's the D coordinator. And then obviously we saw that Jonas Griffith, he had gotten hurt. Remember in preseason first play, hyperextended his elbow, and then that impacted things from the standpoint. That forced Alex Singleton to get the start. We know Josey was also banged up, not ready to go. So Alex and Jonas got the week 1 start, but the ideal starting lineup was really going to be Josey and Jonas. So we've seen that. So maybe the Broncos, George Paton, who's still on the staff, the scouting department, a lot of the main pieces that were there when he came in initially are still there. Maybe there is a vision that they see like, hey, we think that this guy can start. But the bigger question here, Sayre, as you mentioned, when it comes to Jonas, how is it going to be for him coming off of the ACL injury, right? I mean, this is 2 years in a row he's had a season-ending injury. He had the foot injury back in 2022, the ACL in training camp, but he's fully ready to go for OTAs. Like, he's not even going to be limited, to my understanding and knowledge. He's going to be full go. So maybe this does help him here.
I think it really does. And he's one of those guys that we got to remember. I mean, when you talk about RAS warriors, the RAS holes on the team, the relative athletic score warriors on the team, Jonas Griffith, like you mentioned, the body type, I mean, athletically speaking as well, Cody, he's one of the best athletes on the team. You put him side by side with a guy like Baron Browning. There's very few differences with them in terms of body type, in terms of speed, explosiveness, vertical jump, 40-yard time. So there's a lot to like with Jonas Griffith. And of course, his pre-draft workout was a while ago at this point. So I understand that we're talking about athletic traits for a guy who's suffered 2 straight season-ending injuries. But if Jonas Griffith is able to stretch together some good health, if he's able to get some good luck, because oftentimes in the NFL, Cody, that's what it requires, is just some good luck. Stay healthy and go week to week. The Broncos, I feel, have the right training staff and the right, people getting the players right. So I think Jonas, if he could stay healthy, I mean, it's not just it's not exactly the same, but it's kind of similar to the situation that we had with Singleton a couple of years ago, where the Broncos are playing this game of musical chairs, the revolving door at linebacker, and you just kind of have to stick with whoever can stay healthy for you. If that ends up being Jonas Griffith, I think fans will be pleasantly surprised. As you mentioned, the first opportunity that he got in Vic Fangio's defense in 2021, 4 games, over 40 total tackles, and he was making plays behind the line of scrimmage. Everybody was, including us watching, we're kind of like, wow, I mean, this is surprising. I thought he was just brought in to play special teams. I think at worst, that's what you're getting from Jonas, but at best, I mean, the Broncos really had high hopes for him in 2022 as a starting linebacker. So I feel like, Cody, he could be a great option for the team, especially as we talk about those budget-friendly options.
Well, and now it goes to maybe our next point here. You talk about budget friendly. Well, there's nothing more budget friendlier than a rookie linebacker, right? Well, not necessarily a rookie anymore. He's going to be a second-year player. But at the NFL Scouting Combine, George Paton was asked about Drew Sanders, and they had made the illusion that they had pretty much Drew Sanders was more than likely going to stay at outside linebacker. With Josey departing, do you see this changing and him going back to off-ball linebacker? Where, look, at times in the regular season last year, particularly Miami, it was everything looked fast for, like, a little bit slower for the Broncos defense, faster for the Dolphins than anything else that we've seen. He had some struggles with the processing and just the reaction to the linebacker in the regular season, but that doesn't mean that he can't play that position effectively, especially the mic. Now, in your opinion, do you see this move of Josey leaving, opening the door for Drew to maybe go back now to off-ball linebacker?
I really hope it does, because you and I talked about this pick when it was made. Like, I didn't really like it, not because I don't like Drew Sanders, but because I feel like if you're taking a guy who's kind of positionless in college, I mean, you have to make sure you have a clear plan and vision. And we thought, Sean Payton said it, they got a clear plan and vision for him. If he wasn't good enough as an off-ball linebacker, man, you just wasted, what was it, the 67th pick in last year's draft on a guy who now is he going to take snaps from Nick Bonito, Baron Browning, Jonathan Cooper? Like, are you going to give some of their snaps to Drew Sanders, who's supposed to be, like, this was supposed to be the plan, right? You're supposed to say, all right, see you later, Josey. We're not going to pay you. We're going to let Drew Sanders play next to Singleton. Like, we anticipated this move from the second he was drafted. If the Broncos aren't going to dive headfirst into that, that was a huge mistake in last year's draft, where you could have done a number of other things. Could have traded back from that pick, could have taken somebody else. Tank Dell was probably, I think he was still on the board at that point. I mean, there's so many other options that you could have gone with. It's like, let the vision play out. And if your coaches aren't getting the most out of Drew Sanders, like, what's going on there? So I don't know. He just wasn't effective enough, Cody, in terms of rushing the passer for me to say, like, he shouldn't be an off-ball linebacker. That needs to come to fruition. They need to get that back in the mix and rolling again. Maybe George thought that Josey was going to come back when he made those comments about Drew. And now that Josey's leaving for Carolina, maybe that plan has shifted back. So the snaps are going to be there. The opportunity, the competition is going to be there. We've mentioned every linebacker on the Broncos 90-man roster already in the show. Alex Singleton, Jonas Griffith, and then maybe Drew Sanders. That's it. There's nobody else. No future signings. No other guys that were on the practice squad. That is it. Those are the 3. So we know, like you said earlier, Cody, that there's going to be meat added back to the bone. It's going to be a matter of who. Is it going to be Drew Sanders? And that may be his only clear path at this point to playing time.
Well, Sayre set it up perfectly there, Broncos Country, because on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, we're going to ask the question, should the Broncos still look at NFL free agency to add another linebacker, or should they focus on the NFL draft, where they do have 8 overall picks, could acquire more, could trade a couple of those picks, maybe to even move up? We'll debate that here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos podcast is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. And it is March, folks. You know what that means? Not only is it my birthday month, but it's also time for some madness at the collegiate basketball level, where upsets happen, Cinderella stories, they come true. Hearts get broken from some teams who have higher seeds, and FanDuel is the perfect place to get on the emotional roller coaster that is March Madness. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers, they get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So if you sign up today as a brand new customer over there at FanDuel, you go place a $5 bet and it wins. Guess what? You're going to get $200 in bonus bets that you can use on point spreads. You can use it on money lines, and you can even pick who's going to win it all. It's not just college basketball, but a wide variety of different sports where FanDuel can get you in on all the action. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Once again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon, and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Will the Denver Broncos go the NFL free agency route to add to the linebacker position, or could they just wait to the NFL draft and add some young guys as the position continues to evolve here? That's the question we're going to throw out here in today's final segment of Locked On Broncos here on your favorite podcasting provider, wherever you get it, or also on YouTube. We appreciate you so much, Broncos Country, for making us your first listen of the day every single day. The offseason's already proven to be a little bit busy for the Broncos, and this is the place to be if you want up-to-date, objective coverage of all things orange and blue. Sayre kind of throwing it out here as we get into the final portion of today's episode of the show. What path should the Broncos take, in your opinion? I think first off, we should start because we're in NFL free agency. As the time that we're sitting down recording this episode of the show, reacting to Josey Jewell's departure, it is Wednesday, so this could change because this comes out on Friday. This could change everything, though, because the free agency market, we saw guys like Patrick Queen sign big-time money with the Pittsburgh Steelers. In my opinion, I don't know if Denver's going to be in a position to go out and spend big at this position, but if Denver were to look to bring in some guys, Sayre, who are some options you think they should take a look at that are free as of the time that we're sitting down recording this?
I hope they take a look at some guys, Cody, that could be interested in signing a one-year deal and hoping to cash in free agency next offseason. Meaning, I hope they kind of take a chance on some reclamation projects. I think just like with Drew Sanders, you look at free agency and how the market has thinned out. It wasn't a good free agency market at linebacker anyway, but the players that were available flew off the board in the first couple of days of the negotiating period. So there's guys that are left that, okay, there's some talent there, but you're going to have to get the best out of these guys. It's not like you're signing a proven player. You're not going to be signing somebody who on Pro Football Focus ranked in the top 20 at the linebacker position this past year. You're going to be taking a risk. You're going to be taking a risk on a guy just like you are with Jonas Griffith, just like you did with Drew Sanders. And here's a couple names that I actually kind of like, Cody. Devin White, a player that Broncos fans were all about a couple years ago in the draft. I can't remember if that was 2019 or 2020, one of those two, where he was drafted 5th overall by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And obviously now his career has gone down a path to where there was even some drama last year in Tampa Bay with him and Warren Sapp. You know, I think Warren Sapp was calling him out for the way that he was, his effort, things like that. Like I said, you're going to have to get the best out of these guys. I'm pretty sure Devin White was like 80th out of 82 linebackers on Pro Football Focus grades last season. So former 5th overall pick, maybe buy low on a guy like Devin White. He's athletic. He's fast. He's got the talent. It's just a matter of, can you get the best out of him? Similar name like that, Cody, maybe somebody like Isaiah Simmons, another former top 10 draft pick, connection to Vance Joseph, but we don't really know, like, is there bad blood between Isaiah Simmons and Vance Joseph? It's I guess read Twitter and see what people say, but I wouldn't mind seeing that at all. I mean, seeing Isaiah Simmons, who could play a versatile role for you, another super ultra athlete who, why not take the 1-year risk and see what could happen next offseason? I mean, that could be great. He had over 200 tackles, Cody, between 2021 and 2022 with the Arizona Cardinals, Vance Joseph's final 2 seasons there. He had over 200 tackles, 6 forced fumbles, a bunch of QB hits. He's getting after the quarterback, making plays behind the line of scrimmage. Isaiah Simmons, he could be somebody, at least to take a 1-year flyer and familiarity with the defensive scheme. So those are 2 names that I would look at right off the bat.
Well, and I think ideally looking at that is, okay, I mean, it adds, I think, a dynamic to the Broncos position room right there that they don't necessarily have. And when I look at that, it's like, no, I'm not saying that Jonas Griffith isn't athletic. I mean, he's very, very athletic, but Raz sometimes doesn't always translate to what you see on the field. But you look at those prototypes in Devin White, you look at the Isaiah Simmons, and they certainly have that dynamic that Denver certainly doesn't possess right now. And I don't even think right now we know, like, how effective of a blitzer is Jonas Griffith. Like, we don't know that. But these 2 guys, the Devin Whites, Isaiah Simmons, they can do that effectively well. in this scheme. They can cover running backs. And just to kind of put it out there, I know a lot of people are saying, well, the Broncos need a linebacker that can cover a tight end. I don't think in today's modern NFL, folks, like we got to get to the point. More than likely, safeties and nickel guys will cover tight ends, especially in the slot, especially even if they're in line with their hand in the dirt. Linebackers, most of the time, they'll play the spire. They'll drop to that middle hook curl. Like that's really what we see in terms of coverage. You're never going to really see a one-on-one coverage dynamic with an inside linebacker and a tight end. If you do, it's going to be a rarity. It's not going to happen that often. So I don't think that needs to be the true measuring point. But can you get an all-around player who can play against the run, who can blitz the quarterback, who can drop back and be effective in passing windows at times? I think that needs to be the criteria for what the Broncos are looking like. And they could also maybe look at that in this year's NFL draft. Now, look, we're still going to have a little bit of time here. I think our primary focus for the Broncos in the draft right now is really focused on quarterback until Denver addresses that position. But linebacker could be a very, very interesting piece. I know there's some talented prospects in this year's draft that the Broncos have maybe attended some pro days. I think, what's the Wyoming linebacker's name, if I'm not mistaken? There's a guy up there that they've been taking a look at as well. Could the Broncos maybe invest in the NFL draft at adding another inside linebacker?
Wouldn't that be it would be a little frustrating to me, honestly, Cody, with only 2 picks in the first 3 rounds. Like you just spent the 67th pick last year on Drew Sanders, and now you're putting him at a position where he's kind of a misfit, couldn't even crack the rotation at Alabama. And I think that would be really frustrating for me to see the Broncos try to overcorrect by going with one of their top 2 picks at linebacker on day 3. All bets are off. Couldn't care less your positional value on day 3, right? I mean, those are where you want to find those guys that, hey, we took a shot in the 4th or 5th round on this linebacker. He ended up becoming a starter for us. Hey, Josey Jewell, how about it? He was a 4th round pick, right? But it took him a couple years. So I don't think we should be expecting anybody the Broncos realistically can draft to just come in and automatically be Fred Warner or something like that, And I think that's realistic to say, like, hey, you come in, you play special teams, you crack the rotation. Maybe by year 2 you develop under this coaching staff. But I would be so frustrated, Cody, if the Broncos do anything at the linebacker position with their first 2 picks. Right now they've got a first rounder, 12th overall. Unless you trade back and accumulate 2 or 3 more picks in rounds 1 through 3, that's the only way that I would say, okay, yeah, let's get a Peyton Wilson from North Carolina State, athletic freak, or Edgerrin Cooper from Texas A&M is another super athletic guy who's really, one of the top players at his position. This isn't known for this draft class is not known for the linebacker position. Let's just put it that way. It's known for the positions the Broncos need the most: quarterback, tackle, wide receiver. Like, that's what the Broncos desperately need, and that's where they need to go, in my opinion, with their top 2 picks. But linebacker on day 3, is that guy going to come in and start for you? That's the question. That's kind of where I lean to free agency. And maybe you lean on some guys that you have on your staff, like Bo Lowry, super familiar with Devin White from his time at LSU, super familiar with a guy like Quan Alexander, who's once again a free agent for the 800th time. And still, I don't even think he's 30 years old yet. So there's guys like that out there that you got to find if you got familiarity with these guys, or if you feel like they can come in and be a good dart throw for you. That's why I would lean to free agency.
And this is where you want to take chances as well. Dart throws can sometimes pay off in a big way. I think, if you look in the NFL draft, the top 100, right? You talk about the juiciest part of the steak. It's the picks between that range there that has the most upside there. Will the Broncos go that path? It's an interesting question here. In Broncos country, we want to hear from you. What do you think that they should do here in terms of the inside linebacker position? Add another piece or 2 in free agency, or focus on the NFL draft? Make sure you let us know if you're watching or listening to Locked On Broncos, wherever you get your podcasts, or available on YouTube. The first week of NFL free agency frenzy was crazy, but make sure you subscribe here, Locked On Broncos, because you get up-to-date news on who the Broncos re-sign, who they sign, and also the ripple effects of how the roster is affected by players potentially departing, with bonus episodes, full-length episodes, and more. You get that here, Locked On Broncos, Broncos Country. We'll see you next time for a brand new episode of the show.